So let's start with the trends and the emerging challenges. So many countries face high and extreme risk of food insecurity, struggling with core issues of affordability, availability, and quality, safety of food. So you see on the map, I mean, really most of the countries face some medium, high, or extreme risk of food insecurity, mostly in Africa, but also here in South Asia. And even, in countries like the United States, which is green here, but there even also you find, geographical pockets of food security is quite common. There are a lot of people that go hungry to bed every day, around 870 million people, and the poor, like around 3/4 of the poor live in rural areas, and they mostly work on agriculture and depend on the natural resources they are working on, which are more and more degrading and also are very vulnerable to climate change. So basically, with the population increase by 2050, there's going to be really, and the changing diets, that means that more production, like 60% more food will have to be produced. This means 2 billion more cereals, meat, and a lot of, just from everything, right? Here maybe in this one, you see that mostly in Asia, food production has and will increase much more in the last few years. And if you see there, for example, meat consumption. So in Asia, meat consumption is increasing a lot. So in general, around 76% there will be more demand for meat in 2050, and of which like a third will come from East Asia. Let's talk about productivity. Around since like 2000, since the 80s practically, growth of agricultural output was driven mostly of higher use of production factors. So, we talk about more land, more fertilizers, more water, instead of actually having these resources used more efficiently and adopting new technologies. And East Asia, the Pacific region, actually ranked at the top fertilizer consumption per hectare worldwide, and also on water, you have like around, for example, in Vietnam, you have 95% of the fresh water that goes to agriculture, and 82% in Indonesia and the Philippines. And the total factor productivity growth has been very modest. So basically, moving forward, what we really would like to see is to have more production, but using less of all these inputs, using less land, using less water, using less fertilizers, cutting less trees, etc. Right? And the productivity is not just about farming; it's about the entire food system that has to get more productive. So, and this goes to processing, logistics, retail. And you can see the little figure on the left. So it really goes from upstream to the input suppliers, fertilizer, etc., to the aggregations of producer organizations, small traders, etc., transport, processing, trading, and then also the retail. On the right, you can see, for example, the low milling efficiency and high logistical cost in Indonesia, and the picture down of the traditional wet market that needs to be upgraded, to ensure food safety standards, etc. The water resources for agricultural activities are also getting scarcer due to growing demand for irrigation and should be more efficient. So if you look at the figure, worldwide around 70% of water goes to agricultural use. But if you see like Central and South Asia, it's like very high. It's like 95%, and also East and Southeast Asia is also above the average. So basically, and this comes there's competition over water due to increased use of water for households and industries. And if you look at the example of China, here you see that nowadays China uses percentually less. And this was a huge change. In the 50s it was like 97% was actually used for agriculture. Then it went down, and nowadays like around 62%. And the rest goes to domestic use and to the industry. So the sector remains highly vulnerable to droughts and more extreme weather events. You can see on the map, this is just a map for the years 2008 and 2012. It just shows some examples of how droughts and extreme weather can affect the grain. So there's like a lot of droughts, and this obviously affects production and the cost afterwards, right? And so this has like huge impacts on the world's food security. Also, climate change will significantly affect food production, and East Asia will be very affected. So you can see on this map, the green is basically where the percentage of where yields could potentially improve, and the redder it gets, the more affected they will be. There's just very few winners, like maybe some parts in Canada, Northern Europe, Russia. And the rest, and mostly where people are much poorer, they are basically the ones that are most affected, right? So with more frequent extreme events and greater pest infestation, etc. So these demographic and dietary changes are transforming the risk profile of food systems. And so we cannot anymore just look at policies individual, like agriculture, nutrition, and environment. This all has to kind of come together. It's very interlinked, and that's why there's a need of convergence of all these policies. And I will talk then a little bit more about all these four pictures that you see there. So it's basically first the double burden of malnutrition. So it's both stunting and obesity. We have the competition for natural resources. They come from urbanization, but also from industry plantations. There's all the biosecurity and food safety crisis and the food waste. So let me start with double burden of malnutrition. So in the last few decades, there was a decrease in undernourishment. So that's good, but it hasn't translated into improved nutritional outcomes. So if you look, for example, at this figure up left, there is some certain correlation between income per capita and stunting, right? But for example, in the countries in the region have done pretty bad. For example, Philippines, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Laos, Papua New Guinea, they are all actually, they have much worse stunting statistics for their income levels. And on the down, you see that there are countries that suffer much more from stunting. Others are more struggling with obesity, but then there are also a lot of countries that actually struggle with both. So basically, they struggle with stunting and obesity. And in many countries, actually, kids and people just go directly from stunting into obesity because of a lot of non-nourishing bad food. So here you see, like mostly in the Pacific, many countries that have both a lot of obesity and stunting. Over the last decades or so, consumer diets changed a lot. So in the good sense, let's say, I mean, there's more consumption. Before it was almost in the region mostly just rice. Now there's also much more fruits and vegetables. But not all countries have adapted to this changing crop mix. The crop mix to the changes. So for example, since mostly now also vegetables and fruits are being consumed, so you look at the left, China has actually done pretty well. For example, they have increased in the last 15 years, they have now much more fruits and vegetables, less rice. They have adapted well. But then on the other side, you see Indonesia, that has not, percentually, right, that don't have increased, the rice is like the same. There is actually even less fruits and vegetables and much more now oil crops. So it doesn't represent actually this kind of change in diets. And several countries have concerns over food staple imports after divert attention from high-value products with a large share of food import value. So I think it's important to say that countries with highly successful agri-food systems, both are major exporters and importers. And food imports per capita in East Asia and Pacific region remain very low compared to other higher middle income countries, as you can see in the figure, for example, the US, China, and China. Where it works pretty well, it's in Thailand and in Vietnam and in Thailand, where they have developed very competitive horticulture industries with increased food and vegetable imports and exports. And this, in the end, benefits both consumers and producers. So we'll now move on to the urbanization and the retailing. So on the left, you can see, by 2025, we expect to have around 70% of the population in East Asia and 55% in Southeastern Asia to live in urban centers. So this urban expansion is obviously expected to reduce cropland. On the other side, you see on the right, you see the development of the grocery retail. So it changes a lot. For example, the more the countries develop, the more modern trade market they have. So you see Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Malaysia actually too have modern trade markets. On the other side, India has a very, very, very low percentage of modern trade markets. And then you have others like the Philippines that is still low, but it's increasing rapidly. So in the region, there is a significant conversion of farmland for urban development, mainly in coastal areas around large cities. So a country will need to better govern and compensate for its urban expansion into high productive urban agricultural lands. So you see basically all the red spots are, you see the map from China, from Indonesia, and from India. And so the red spots are basically farmland that was converted to urban land. So it's a very large area. And also on the right in the table, you see that actually Asia accounts for more than half of all the cropland losses due to urbanization. But there's also increasing pressure on agricultural land resources due to industrial plantations. So if you look at Indonesia and Malaysia, there is a continued deforestation and the conversion of peatlands into agricultural use, mostly for industrial plantations, but also for rice, which caused a lot of forest degradation. So you can look at these figures, which are really, at least to me, really impressive. I mean, it's the degree of the industrial plantations, how it increased over the years in Indonesia and in Malaysia. The last point I want to mention is the food losses and wastages that are critical for ensuring availability and affordable food. So you can see that the more normally a country is developed, the more food waste it has. We differ normally the food waste and the losses. So the losses are basically down the value chain from farming, post-harvest, transport, etc. And then the waste is basically on the plate at home, right? But once we have the food at home or in the restaurant, etc. And so the more developed the country is, the more waste you basically have in a household, in a restaurant. And on the other side, you mostly in Africa, but also in Asia, you have much more losses that are due to poor transport systems, storage facilities, and improper packaging. So let me now go to the policy implications. We have done a little framework with our colleagues here that says basically for the region that it's like from rice, where we say it's paddy rice, right, to rice, which is basically reliable, inclusive, competitive, and environmental sensitive food systems in order to go from food self-sufficiency to nutrition security for all. And so for reliable food systems, we think about the availability and affordability of food, but also the mitigation of production and market risks. Inclusive, we think it's to include smallholder farmers into domestic and international value chains, but also to get good remuneration income for the farmers and in the value chain and have improved diets. For competitive, it's increased productivity along the value chains and also the economies of scale, minimize losses, what I just mentioned before, and also to meet consumer needs in the end. And the last is the environmental sensitive, which is basically to prevent and minimize adverse environmental impacts associated with food supply and distribution. So at the bank we do quite a lot, the clients also ask us quite a lot to do public expenditure reviews, where we go and analyze all the public expenditures that are done or spent for the agricultural sector and see how the efficiency and effectiveness of public spending can be improved. So I just wanted to list some of these lessons learned from good agriculture, good international practices that have been included. So in general, public expenditures matter for growth, especially when it's spending for technology dissemination, human capital, reducing transaction costs, and attracting private capital. It's not always productive because we normally kind of divide between public goods and private goods. So normally when you spend into public goods, like for example agriculture, research and development, then it's much more efficient. In subsidies, mostly not. Mostly if it's not well targeted, if it's not transparent, and if it's not willing to improve the technologies. So on irrigation, not so much to go into construction and rehabilitation, but more to operations and maintenance. Also the economic composition is important, the quality of implementation. So in general, we advise governments to do less managing, lead providing, direct investing, buying and selling, but more of facilitating, regulating, enabling and monitoring. So I would like to go quickly to the role of the World Bank. We basically have two twin goals. One is the ending poverty, and the other one is a share prosperity, basically to increase the growth of the bottom 40%. And our vision for the global food system is really to be able to feed everyone in the world with safe, adequately nutritious diet every day, to increase the incomes from farming, but also in all the value chains, to improve health outcomes, so basically have less malnourishment and better nutrition, to have reduced greenhouse gas emissions and sustainable use of natural resources, and improve resilience and responsiveness to shocks. So this is most also, I mean, if you haven't heard about the bank, we have a lot of services that we have to tackle all kinds of topics, but among them water and food security. So we basically have two broad products. One are financing instruments, the other ones are services. For the financing instruments, we have investment project financing, which basically are loans, credits, grants for physical and social infrastructure. Then we have development policy financing, which is basically budget support to support the policy and institutional change. Also, program for results, which is the last product that was created some years ago, which is basically to finance country programs. Then we have a lot of trust funds and grants, which are mostly dedicated to the poorest countries. And then private sector options, which are, we have several institutions in the World Bank Group, so that there are two of them, the IFC and the Liga, which provide direct investment financing and guarantees to the private sector. The rest are two other institutions, the IDA and IBRD, which are working with the governments. On the services, we have technical assistance, so basically providing advice to governments in all kinds of issues and that. We have these reimbursable advisory services, which is a bit the same, but the governments actually pay for the services. We have economic and sector work for policy and strategic discussions, business advice, which comes again for the private sector arm from IFC, and donor aid coordination, which is not really well seen because we try to coordinate donors and integrate between governments and the donor community. So this looks maybe all a bit weird, so I wanted to just put maybe an example of how this kind of could look like in one country. So in Vietnam, for example, we have, the bank has a lot of analytical work on food security and agriculture, as for example, technical assistance for the agricultural restructuring plan, several studies, I will not list them now, and also the Vietnam Development Report on agricultural transformation, more from less. And then we had a lot of operations, so investments to finance coffee replanting, large-scale application for rice production, irrigation service delivery, improved water resources in aquaculture, and improved infrastructure practices for hygiene and sanitation. So, and then my last slide to give another example of a trust fund this time. So a trust fund, a multi-donor trust fund, which is very important for food security, is the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, with this beautiful acronym GAFSB. And it's a very nice program. It's a large program. It has around 1.6 billion US dollar, and it really helps the poorest country with their long-term kind of vision. So to apply for this trust fund, the countries have to have like a long-term vision and investment a strategy and investment plan. So since most of them don't have one, we provide technical assistance to work with the governments to have this kind of vision and strategies and investment plans. And then GAFSB basically finances investment gaps in these investment plans, and we have them also prepare the project. So the coordinating unit is in the World Bank, but we work very closely with other regional development banks, with FAO and IFAD and the World Food Program.
Right, so this is the outline of the presentation. I'll give you a little bit of introduction of this work, and then we focus on the Vietnam side on the crop yield based on the climate change. Okay, and then a little bit more on the macro level drought index. Insurance. I think it's quite interesting to link up with what Ellie has presented earlier. Now, just quickly on Singapore side, we import from these three different countries. India, Vietnam, and Thailand. These are the three top countries from which we import our rice, roughly about 90%, in that order of magnitude, 90%. The rest are not that interesting over here, the tiny little percentage. Three main countries from which we import our rice. This is the 2013 statistics, but it's not much different from that 2015 statistic, except India goes up more, and Thailand also more. Vietnam comes up quite a bit, 22% and so forth. Now, this is in a nutshell, Vietnam side. These are the paddy cultivated area, Red River Delta on the top, and then the north central coast, and the south central coast, and then of course the Mekong River Delta. Okay, so out of the whole, these four main domains, Mekong River Delta obviously produces the most because it's much more fertile than any other places. What is interesting is to take note of this here. This is 56%, 15, and 15. What is important over here is this here. The 90% of the Vietnam exporting rice is coming from the Mekong River Delta. Okay, so just take note of that. If something happens to that area, we have to switch our strategy where to import the data from, the rice from. So for the rice yield, we use this particular model, DSZ, the decision support system, agro-technology transfer. That's a crop simulation model. That what it needs is nothing but the weather data, or for future, nothing but climate data. Okay, soil property, crop species, and the cultivar, and plus again, how do you manage the irrigation part? All right, first of all, the impact of climate change. What we did is for the Institute, Tropical Marine Science Institute, we were quite lucky. We were commissioned twice, 2007, 2009, 3 years roughly, and then 2011 to 2014, another climate change study by the government of Singapore. Okay, so both are essentially the same kind of a study, but except the detail is much more, and then the spatial resolution is much more fine, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, all right, so this is the domain of the study, what we did. So the so-called dynamical downscaling for the entire Southeast Asia. Okay. So, so for the previous IPCC, not the second last IPCC result, so we used that for the study I will be presenting over here. But we are in the process of updating our result with the latest IPCC 2014. Okay. So what you will see later on the result is nothing but coming from the emission scenario, what is called A2. Okay? So in the context of the latest IPCC 2014, this is equivalent to the RCP 8.5 thereabout. So then you go over here. So this is what we have done for that study. And then currently we are working on this one over here. The model dwarf at 20 by 20 kilometers, previously 30 by 30 kilometers, and then a different kind of GCM, global climate model, we use. Okay? As usual, when you use a model, you have to fine-tune them, calibrate them, parameterize them, and then at the same time, of course, at the end of the day, you have to validate them. Okay? So what you see over here, this is the result, simulated versus observed after during the validation period. Okay? Now, for temperature, this is climatic research unit. This is the data coming from the climatic research unit of East Anglia University. Okay, so you have plenty of data you can extract from there. Now, temperature usually is a very simple one to get it done properly. Okay? So as you see over here, what you need to do is simply compare the color between the two, simulated versus the observed. Yeah, pretty decent. Okay? Now, what you see on the right side is nothing but the topography of this part of the world. The red color over here is nothing but your mountains, ranges, and so forth. Now, as you see over here, like the simulated over here, the color on the mountain, always the temperature measured is 2 meters above the where you're standing. Okay, obviously on the mountainside, you're cooler than on the ground surface, lower layer. But over there, even though the so-called observed, you don't see that pronounced the temperature, the cooler temperature over there, because the resolution over there is coarser, 50 by 50, ours is 30 by 30. So that's the added value of having high resolution modeling. One more thing for the whole domain, and you're looking at the monsoon season. We have 2 monsoon seasons in this part of the world. One is northeast monsoon, yeah, November, December, January, February, and DJF. And then so what you need to see, you can compare color with colors on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, observed, simulated. They look pretty decent, the color distribution over there. And then again, we have southwest monsoon, JJA, June, July, August. Okay? So this is 30 years data. Yeah? So observed again versus simulated. Okay? Now temperature, winds we have presented. Precipitation is the not one of the nastiest parameters, the most difficult to get it proper. Now, here, of course, we like to believe that our simulation is better than the observed. Don't forget, in our part of the world, there are not that many of observation data, except you use the other part of the world and then maybe essentially interpolate and so forth, based on the other part of the world. Okay? The whole world is run, but the result is coming for Singapore or this part of the world, that's what it is. Okay, so this is what we did. Okay, this is just to give you a flavor of what we have done. The year is changing 20, and so on and so forth until the year 2100. This is only for one of the particular GCM global climate model coming from Max Planck University, Max Planck Institute, ACAM, and then again on that side is a reputation changing with the years. Yeah. Again, with all the data we have, we like to see the projection of the year 2020 to 2050 for Vietnam. This is for Haugiam data. Haugiam is on which we have collaboration with the Canton University in Vietnam, South Vietnam, on the Delta side. Now, what you see is that we break it down into decadal. Okay, so the 2020s, 2030s, and 2040. Now, what you see over here, the color, is nothing but we're dealing with the rain-fed only without irrigation. Okay? So the first one of the results from this particular model, GCM, this is the American one, CCSM. So you have negative 33% with respect to this particular year here. So we have a baseline, 2004, 2014. So it's supposed to be projected by negative of 33% with respect to that particular year period. Okay? If you have an irrigation, obviously common sense that you will get a less reduction. Obviously, the blue color is with irrigation. Okay? But nevertheless, some of them are still, the year 2040 is still negative. Now with the same plotting scheme, you will see, I will not say too much about it, with different GCM. This is the Japanese, this is the Max Planck Institute GCM, downscale all the way to this part of the world. So you have for this particular period, for this season, 24% reduction in average, based on the 3 models that is. Another season, summer to autumn, again, open it up. So, yeah. Again, you have quite a bit of reduction too. Yeah. So overall, in average, you have a 35% reduction for the year 2020 to 2050. Now, we do that for a few places, and then the rest of the Vietnam is quite scary figure. Okay, look at the color over here. The extreme one, extreme risk. Extremely risky is about 80%. It's of that color, is minus 10, minus 30, minus 50. These are the area, paddy field, paddy cultivated areas. So you have a significant reduction in the year 2020 to 2050 with respect to the 2004-2014 production. Now, again, this some of the publications we have, as far as climate change is concerned, some of the journal we publish over there. Okay. Now, something of interest, perhaps related to Ellie's presentation. So we have this particular project of the IFC or the World Bank noted our presentation on the Vietnam side. We wanted to see whether there could be possibility of working together on the macro level drought index insurance for Central Java. Okay, so that's what we did. Just quickly, again, some of the data. Okay, so the Central or the Java, for that matter, accounted about 45% of the total production of rice in Indonesia. 45%. Okay, so there you go. Over here we have El Nino period, but obviously the very significant one was in 1997, 98, and so forth. Now, again, some of the data over here, information 2.75 loss, and so forth. Now, what you see over here, essentially there are 3 seasons, rice production period. One is what is called the wet season, followed the first dry season, the second dry season. Okay? Sorry, this is the second dry season, and this is the first dry season. The first dry season is the worst. Literally much less rainfall as opposed to the second dry season. Okay, so the wet season obviously we have more rainfall and so forth. Production should not be a problem unless you're dealing with flooding, obviously. Okay? Otherwise, the wet season, that's the most productive area, period. Now, with that said, the question over here, we're asking ourselves, all right, so we want to sell the product to the Central Java governance, okay? So trying to protect themselves when there is a disaster hits them, at least somebody is coming, like the insurance company payout, give the payout, as simple as that. Okay? So the same thing like our car or whatever it is, I mean the insurance, if something, every single scratch we want the insurance company to pay, of course it's going to cost you quite a bit. Okay? So you have to have a sure sum, and then again, where is the bigger value? Okay? Above $500 assuming, then I want them to come in to cover the damages. Beyond lower than $500 for car, for instance, then I'll take care of myself. I can cover it. Okay? Because otherwise the premium is going to be tremendous. Now on the drought index, you see over here this is 0. Okay? Okay? Drought index over here. Now -5. Physically, what it means is that you have drought 5 times of the sigma standard deviation. Okay, -20 meaning 20 times of the standard deviation. Very, 0 obviously is the normal condition. Okay, so that's to get some feeling first of all. Again, on the other side, +5 and so forth, those are the flooding. So this the drought index using what is called as a standard precipitation index. Okay. Now, what we want to see, can we not look at the drought index and then do the insurance part, take care of the insurance part. Okay, so we want to see how good is that index, the correlation part, with the so-called production, with the precipitation part. Okay, so the correlation coefficient, the correlation is pretty high. So between index and precipitation is quite high. And the question again, how is the correlation between drought index with production, rice production? If we could get a pretty high correlation, what it means is that in the future, for the Central Java it is, okay, but there is some index we know now, so the insurance will just give out the payout to the governors. The governors will distribute to the farmers. Okay? So this is what I was talking about, correlating drought index together with the production. It was 1.72. Okay? For the wet period over there. For the dry period, it's a bit difficult to do it because we don't have the data whether they have do the irrigation or not. This one is totally rain-fed only for irrigation. All right. So with that, so we have different places in the Central Java. At the north part, we picked up 1 point, Jepara, Banjar, Negara, and so forth. But only this one is among the 4 we picked up to demonstrate is the one has the lower correlation. Otherwise, they look pretty decent, pretty high correlation-wise. Now, with that, now I think it's on what is important is this is the what is called the risk transfer. This is just merely an exercise to demonstrate. So it's in principle, you have to know what is the sum insured. Get ready to be, like for instance over here, the exercise what we do is we're looking at the year 2015. Based on the 2015, there are so many, this is the 5.2 million hectare planted for paddy. Okay? At that time, the price is in rupiah 1,333 per kilo. So with that, so the government, assuming the government want to get it insured, is at 3.2 billion US dollars. Now, obviously, the question right now is when is the trigger value? Okay, so that when the standard precipitation index, the index hit -5, or they could always choose for -6 and so on and so forth. Okay, the higher or the lower rather you want to go, the less you pay obviously because it might not happen. Okay, so this is based on the -5 index of this SPI. So they will get some payment over there, 6.66 million and so on and so forth for every single trigger as index drop. Okay, so literally, this is obviously a linear function, but you can again agree with the insurance company, the reinsurance company, how you want to do it, okay? Based on the agreement between the insurance company and the place itself. So just with that example, now this is what it is the payout for, assuming that was the basis behind the whole insurance. In 1994, they would have gotten 33 million US dollars for payout because of the index is below -5, and similarly for the other years where the index is below that, they will get the payout directly from IFC. Okay? I think with that note, I finished my talk. Thank you very much.
And then during the very specific case in Vietnam, how this can affect Singapore. So what we have food security as it relates to water security or insecurity. And we have rainfall, precipitation, we have that it can affect with extreme events. But then we have 2 things both of them said, which was very important. That resource is scarce, and there are every time more users. So in the case of people who consume, there is pollution, and of course the role of institutions. And now you said something very important. In the case of Vietnam, as how can it affect to Singapore and also Indonesia? If we have any event as a result of which we lose the production of rice, and then Singapore can go and buy somewhere else. But what happens with that? What happens with Vietnam and what happens with Indonesia? You still lost all your production, or whatever percentage of production you were going to use for export and for internal consumption. So what do you think happens in this case?
Well, the next thing what we have in mind is that to look at Thailand, because remember that our dynamic downscaling for climate change, it covers the whole Southeast Asia. We can't go to India side because we did not do the downscaling, climate downscaling for that part of the world. So we have all the data for Southeast Asia, literally 20 by 20 kilometers. So what we could do, I'm in contact with the Royal Agriculture of Thailand. Okay, so we hope to get some data from them. Without their cooperation, it's difficult. So like some of the data we got it from the Vietnam side, but some other places we don't have it, but we rely on the satellite data. It's not too bad, but obviously the best would be to get it from observation directly, not only from the satellite, on the ground truth. Okay? So Thailand is another place, I mean, number 2 at the moment. Yeah? So we're looking at all of them, the fragrant rice, obviously.
The World Bank, and then any of you can start making questions. The World Bank, is it looking overall at the possibilities, at the risk in the world? And something on which Robert has been working, that is interest on the insurance, but it's not the insurance, it's the risk. Is it that we all have to be worried because at some point the stress will be so much that there won't be this food available, not only because we are not producing it well, but because of the extreme events? Is it something the World Bank is looking at in general in the world?
Yeah, no, definitely. What we do in many countries are like agricultural risk assessments. So we even have a toolkit somewhere. If you Google it, probably you'll get it somewhere. So we do that in many countries, mostly to assess production risk and market risks. Now, we also have I think it's more internally, it's pretty new, we have like a little observant, like a observatory, how we can say, like in the bank that looks exactly at all the risk in the agricultural sector. So we have a very well-known, he used to be a professor in Kuan, but now he's with us for a while. So he looks at all this kind of risk that are going on in the world and to monitor that on a daily basis.
And how does the world look?
Well, I mean, no, I mean, it's you know, you see it. One thing is to see things in paper, but other things are to see things when you go to the field to talk to the producers. And I think that's when you read things on the paper, you're not very, you see, okay, this is going to happen like that and that. But once you go and talk to the farmers, it's when you see it's very scary, that is really. I mean, they are really affected by these extreme events, by very hot temperature, etc. So droughts. So it is a fact.
Thank you. So that is for all of us who are here in the school. Remember, any policy is related to reality, and for that we have to go out and go to the field and see the situation. So, is there any question or any comment on any of these two presentations or any concern?
You covered a lot of territory within 20 minutes. I compliment you. I would be able to do a panorama of the problems. 2 comments on your presentation. You mentioned urbanization is taking a lot of land. Agriculture, absolutely correct. But my thesis is another one the world is missing, and that is becoming and will become an even bigger problem, is the soil contamination. In China, for example, primarily because of mining activities, 19.7% of the arable land government has officially declared you cannot grow any crops. In India, they haven't done any work at all, but I suspect it will be equally big. Or at least it probably exceed 10%, more than 10%. No one has a clear idea. That is something we need to look at. Not only the loss of agricultural land, but also on what's happening to the quality of the soil. And the other one I was little amused about your World Bank's plan that no net obesity increase. I think you have lost that battle, to be quite honest. Obesity, there will be no net obesity increase. What I look at it and my crystal ball says, not only the World Bank, the UN has the whole thing, that SDG it's almost going to be impossible to achieve the way things are looking at present. And one quick question to you. You used 1 GCM, am I right?
No, 3.
3 GCM.
Yeah.
3 GCM. To my knowledge, there's about 17 or 18 GCM.
Sorry?
17 or 18 GCM.
Sure.
Yes. With my colleague in MIT, we tried the downscaling the GCM, not in a small, but the entire line basin.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 GCM gave 60% more increase in rainfall. The others showed, another one showed 45% decrease in rainfall, and the others were in between. And so we have a wide uncertainty first in the GCM you use, then downscaling it creates a whole set of other uncertainties, and then there's a lack of data, and whatever data is available, the reliability leaves much to be desired. The question that, as a scientist, that comes to my mind, how reliable is.
So on the urbanization, no, on the soil contamination, I mean that's a huge problem in many countries. So we work. I mean we have colleagues in the World Bank that work also on extractives, and they know mostly. We work with them sometimes to see what can be done, what kind of solutions can be undertaken. Ourselves, we normally look at the soil contaminations mostly on the fertilizers, pesticides, and how this can be decreased the best way. On the obesity, well, I mean that we are now. This is really a huge issue. Before everything was really just it's food security, basically undernourishment, right? So everything was like this is probably like in the last 40 years or so. How to give more food to avoid stunting, right? But I mean now it's very clear that it's okay. This that maybe was won most of the world, but the problem is really not just as much as you can eat, but what you eat, right? And and it's not just it's really a cross-sectorial issue. So it's not just us in our case with agriculture. We work a lot with health and other kind of areas in the bank to see how this can be tackled. So it's really a lot of education. It's not it's not things of like investments. We do kind of a lot of investment build things, but it's actually really capacity building on the ground and with families, mostly with families with small kids or pregnant women to educate them on what to eat, right, and to avoid both the stunting and obesity. So we're working hard on that, and I think it's really something that it's really about the education in the end.
How many GCM and so forth, and they differ one from the others significantly. Now, what we did, we were quite aware of international panel review, of course, quite aware of that too. So what we do is the following: again, arrangement with the international panel reviewer, that we filter the not so good one first. Filter out. How do you filter? Like one of the exercises what we have done is that to look at how does it look like the distribution of temperature, winds, precipitation in this part of the world for the whole domain. Okay? When you're dealing with the so-called statistical downscaling, you don't care about the domain. Just look at one particular port, like the Changi Airport, and the grid point information of the GCM. You couldn't care less about the others, quote unquote. Now, if you look at the one over here, the dynamic has to be right, first of all, climatologically for the years you're dealing with. Okay? Now, and then obviously from the domain, after that you look at the Singapore because we have good data from the Met Service. So we check on the Singapore side. The other places like Bangkok and so forth, we look at on the annual cycle, they call it. Okay? So how does it look like, the annual cycle? Whether the annual cycle like this and yours is totally different things, or even quite different from what is presented on the annual cycle. Now, obviously, you know that Singapore is quite protective to the data. Okay? Obviously, you could not possibly ask data from other countries as well, except you have to Google it. Then you have plenty of the annual cycle for different places in this part of the world. So that's what we did, aside from some of the detailed wind, temperature, humidity, and so on and so forth. We did that. So these are the 3 GCM what we did for the dollars.
Did you transfer that to the wet group?
Sorry?
Because there's a, in terms of rice production, there's 2 types of rice.
Yeah.
Benefit rice, irrigated rice.
Yeah, we focus only on one. Yeah, in our case, for the fragrant rice, a particular type. So we have, I don't remember the code number for that particular rice, fragrant rice. So we used to look into the fragrant rice, what it needs, and so on and so forth. Okay, but this model could handle, quote unquote, 40 types of agriculture type cultivars. We focus on the staple for single purpose rice.
Couple of questions, but I'm an actuary by training, so I quite understand your insurance model of transfer risk. Actually, the whole thing is about redistribution, basically pooling and redistribution. And the question I have actually would apply. Dr. Leong is looking at Asia. I think Dr. Weiss is looking at the world, rightly so. My understanding is that have you looked at the redistribution issue? If there is a specific area whereby there is drought and there's famine and there's problem, are we able to exercise a redistribution model to address the imbalance? Because my understanding is climate change actually has made the climates to be more extreme. So I think your model may be affected by this extreme. The second one that hit me quite sort of transparent is that you're talking about rice, basically, and crops and water. Water definitely is an issue in terms of creating rice and all that. But I mentioned, Dr. Wen just now sitting here, that you didn't look at the other staple food, fish, right? I mean, there's plenty of water in the sea ocean, and I think you don't have that similar problem. But I do not know, because when I know Dr. Leong is coming, his TMSI, they are quite involved in the aquaculture area. So maybe you can give us some ideas of if that has been touched upon by some research.
It's interesting that 15 years ago or so, this was all the rage. People talking about soil degradation as being a limit on food production, etc. It seems to have vanished almost completely from the discussion, which I find very odd. I think partly because some of the predictions for soil erosion particularly were rather extreme. But it's not just contamination, although that's an important issue. I think you said that most of the additional food production is going to come, or is coming from intensification, which has a huge impact on soil structure. So for example, on the Gangetic Plain in India, the lack of fallow, the rice-wheat duo without a break, is turning the soil to mush. There's almost no structure left, which means infiltration capacity goes down, the ability to grow anything is decreasing rapidly. And so it's not just fertilizer, it's not just contamination, both important, it's also soil structure. In the uplands, it's soil erosion. Some parts, large parts of the world have no topsoil left at all. So the ability to grow anything, to get nutrients out of the subsoil, is extremely low. You can use them as hydroponic systems, but that's expensive. So I think this is, I mean, you've kind of answered the question, but it seems to me it's a factor that needs to be raised in public consciousness very much more. And as for the private sector dealing with it, good luck. It's a public sector issue of soil conservation.
Yeah, no, this is definitely an issue that we have looked at at the bank, and also in collaboration with other institutions that are working with us. So, for example, there is a model that was developed by IFPRI, with the International Food Research Institutes, I think. Yeah, so they basically have a model that overlap like several, so they, for example, soil, access, poverty, etc. And so they look at like very micro kind of regions to see what are kind of the best interventions that should be done, taking into consideration the potential for agriculture, the efficiency, the poverty rates, even malnutrition, etc. And it's a very interesting model because it can exactly see, for example, if there's an area which doesn't, which already have high efficiency, but it's not, it doesn't really have potential, and you have high poverty. So there's no need to do a lot of support for agriculture, more agriculture there. So you basically go more like, for example, safety nets, social safety nets in this area. But then you have other areas, for example, where you have a low efficiency now, but you have a high potential, but no a lot of transport. So maybe there you need, to have like roads and agricultural interventions, technical assistance, extension, etc. So it's an interesting model exactly to do specific interventions in each area. So we worked with IFPRI on that, and exactly to not make investments and not make sense basically. On the fish. We work also with fisheries, mostly with our environmental colleagues in the bank, so we have fisheries project. I personally never worked on one. Both fish capture and also aquaculture as well. So on the soil, we agree completely with all your points. Now the last, what is it now, probably like 5, 6, 7 years, we really promote kind of smart agricultural practices, so really to increase productivity, not just to increase productivity, but really in a sustainable way, and to decrease the resilience, to increase the resilience of farmers, to adapt to climate change, and also to really decrease the environmental footprint that agriculture has, and decrease the greenhouse gas emissions. So this is something that we actually look at very strictly now. Basically, in each project that we have, we also have we have several instruments like the climate co-benefits. We basically have to say what is the percentage of each of the total of the project which contributes to climate co-benefits. We do also this kind of exercises like there's an instrument ex-ante co-benefits that looks at that exactly how much carbon can be stored, or what is the balance, the carbon balance basically of the project. So we do all this. We do in every project we have to do all this kind of diligence.
The real issues of soil, in my view, have gone off the agenda. You just answered almost entirely in terms of climate change. The issue is so much bigger than that. It's about whether you've got soil or not in some places, and whether you can grow anything in it, leaving aside climate change. Your answer really gives you away. Or gives the World Bank away, I'm not sure which. It's fascinating. Do you get my point?
Yes, for sure. It's related also to your research. There are areas where we shouldn't, where agriculture we shouldn't produce, right? And this is type of work that also goes together.
Sorry, just related to soil. Singapore, washout is going to come. We are going on vertical grid towards a certain extent. I think that we can add value to that. In the sense that we are trying to take the soil and try to basically build a vertical greenhouse in Singapore because we don't have land. This is an interesting initiative. I mean, you look at soil, yes, we can get a good soil and see whether we can keep it and reuse it. I do not know the technical, the scientific behind it. But there is one way to solve the soil erosion. I can answer with you.
But then you have to think about the nutritional quality of the product as a product.
Yes.
How nutritional is it?
Sure.
So
it's like a small little earth.
So basically there's a lot of trade-offs in here. The test of the vegetables that is done, the particle, and the test of grown vegetable on the land, it really makes a great deal of difference. I can say without any difference, some of the cucumbers you get from Holland, done with hydroponics, you can't eat it unless you put some salad dressing. That's no taste.
Let's come back to you. Basically, three of you to do short. For any further comment you would like to make.
But on fish side, I don't have any answers to you, really. Reason being is what we did, I mean, that my team work on the climate side.
Right.
So then we deal with the water side. Yeah. So the government of Singapore obviously are thinking about three things. One is staple food, in this case rice, fish, yeah, maybe salt fish, I don't know about that part.
Yeah.
That's nice for food, for lunch. And then veg. So we're thinking about doing cabbage now. So at least you have fish, meat, veggie, and rice.
I think my question is that we're worried about water. So fish actually, I assume, use less demand on water. They're in water, we are not in water, so that's my observation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming. And let's remember, every time we think about Singapore, we say Singapore is one of the most secure countries in terms of food security, even though it imports most of the food, but it's a matter of preparedness. But we have learned it's not only Singapore. The whole world is looking around from where to import food. So when we think on this situation of import-export, it's not one country, it's the entire world. Again, thank you for being here, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.